Hi worship leaders, I'm Crystal Martin, the worship ministry leader here at Petra Church, and I am excited to bring you this video about how to communicate with your worship team. Our worship leadership team and a few of our instrumentalists have compiled the best of what we know and are bringing it to you today so that we can all be on the same page and be using the same terms as we communicate with our teams. The reason we value the things you'll hear in this video are because we want to provide an undistracted space for our congregation to encounter the Lord. That starts from the moment you begin putting your set details together, because if you do those things well, you set your band up for success and you take all the pressure off of your rehearsal time. This information will help you eliminate frustration between you and your team during rehearsal. Then you can all be ready to put the details to the side, so to speak, and lead the congregation well. We care about excellence here at Petra because what is more distracting than a worship team fumbling through the set? We want to give our best to the Lord and each other, because the reality is if you take a little more time in your preparation as a worship leader, you make it a good experience for your team and anyone you're leading in worship. The things we share today will enable you to lead a rehearsal with confidence and instruct your team with clarity. As a worship leader, you carry authority in the Spirit to lead people with you into the presence of God, and you also carry the responsibility to set your team up for success. This is done in many ways, but preparing well as communicating clearly is a huge part in doing so. Maybe you don't play an instrument, so you don't know the language your instrumentalists use, or maybe you do play an instrument, but not the instrument of your team member you're trying to instruct. Well, here are some tips and lingo that we have learned through the years. Enjoy.
Say, by the way, can you play Jingle Bells? No. I mean Jingle Bells. You know, deck them halls and all that stuff. No, you don't get it at all. I mean Jingle Bells. You know, Santa Claus and ho ho ho, and mistletoe and presents to pretty girls. That's it!
If you've ever led worship before, you've probably experienced something like that. It's almost like there's a language barrier, but no Google Translate. Siri, please tell me how to tell my drummer to play ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist yet, so we're going to try and teach you what we know. Before we dive into terms we use with each instrument, I want to make sure we're all on the same page with what the different portions of a song are called. Take the song Surrounded, for example. First, you have your intro, the instrumental part at the beginning of the song. Then, more times than not, a song starts with the verse. There are usually several of these throughout the song. Next might be the pre-chorus, a small portion right before the chorus. Then you have your chorus, that main repetitive part of the song. The other part of the song is called the bridge. It's something that we also kind of repeat towards the end of the song. Lastly, the instrumental part at the end of the song is called the outro. The song Battle Belongs has a nice long outro. If you are just doing the arrangement of the recording, you won't need to say much about these portions, except for telling your vocalists on which portion you want them to come in. But if you are deviating from the usual, you'll need to tell the band how many times you want to do each section. This should be spelled out ahead of time on your set details page so that your band can prepare. Don't be afraid to come up with your own arrangement. Yes, it might require some extra work, but it really helps the song to feel fresh, even if you just start with an extra chorus or end with an extra portion of the song. The other term you might hear thrown around is reprise. If you want to do a chorus or bridge after the song has fully ended, you would say, I want to reprise the chorus, or let's reprise the bridge 2 times at the end. Another term that you might use is retard, to slowly slow down the ending of a song so you can instruct your band, hey, let's retard that ending a little bit. Let's start with the drums. When communicating with your drummer, more or less can be interpreted many ways. You can describe the feeling you want or ask them to give you more or less volume. Feel free to instruct them to pay attention to dynamics at a certain part. Something that's helpful to know as a worship leader is what the different drums are called. So here are the terms along with some drum lingo that'll be helpful for you when you communicate with your drummer. First, you have your kick or bass drum. Oftentimes the terms used with this drum are, give me 4 on the floor, meaning you want him to hit it once for every quarter note. You could also explain that you want him to hit it on beats 1 and 3, for instance. Next, you have the snare. It's incorporated into a lot of the things we play, but specifically, you may want to ask for a snare roll, which is this. Drum roll, please. Another part of the drum kit is the hi-hat. Some of the songs we do have rhythms like this on the hi-hat. Next, you have the toms. I love these things. Lots of modern worship songs use tom beats. Some examples are some of our drummers call that last tom beat an open tom groove or spacey toms. It's just a little bit more space between each hit. Last, you have the cymbals. There are 2 crashes and a ride. You might ask your drummer for a cymbal swell at a particular part or to ring out the ending of a song. Other terms used when talking to your drummer are you want them to build, or you want them to open up. Your electric guitarist, unless told otherwise, will cover any main parts he or she hears in the song while incorporating parts where they just play rhythm or the strumming part. Things you may need to ask them are, can you play the lead or the riff for the intro? Can you cover rhythm during the intro? Can you play something ambient during the verse? Can you add some extra drive going into that crescendo? Do you mind holding back leading up to that big part for maximum tension? Give me some power chords for this part. Or maybe you're doing your own arrangement, and in your head you hear an electric doing like a high picking part, for example. Something like this. You could even sing a melody line that you're wanting them to play, like feel free to sing it out in a melody. Acoustic guitar is pretty straightforward. However, feel free to instruct them in some of these ways. Can you pick for this part? Can you play diamond notes here, meaning just strumming 1 per chord? Can you drop out at the end here just to bring down the dynamics? For your bass player, they will default to playing what the recording does unless you instruct them differently. You could ask them to come in at a different part. You could ask them to draw their attention to a more complex bass part you hear, making sure they cover it, or ask them to really drive it going into a big part. The role of your keyboardist is to lay pads to create ambiance, create dynamic, fill empty spaces, sometimes very subtly, and cover riffs. When you communicate with your keys player, you will ask for certain sounds you may want them to use, whether it be keys, synths, organs, or pads. You can ask them to keep things simple by playing a clean piano sound or draw their attention to a particular riff you might hear on the recording. Sometimes it's beautiful to have your keyboardist double up on an electric guitar riff. It's very helpful for you to note in your details page any songs you want them to start and riffs you want them to cover. Please be sure to tell them if you want pads or keys during your welcome, during a closing, or during any transitions. We found that we rely heavily on our keyboardists to create that nice flow throughout your set so that there's not empty space. So as you move through your rehearsal, be in tune with your keyboardists and how you might need them to fill any gaps that might be present. If you have a violinist on your team, feel free to give as much direction or freedom as you would like. You can ask them things like, can you double up on that electric guitar lead or the keyboard riff? Or even have them harmonize with some of those parts. Feel free to specify when there's space you really want them to shine and make sure your front of house hears that as well. They will most likely freestyle unless told to cover a certain part, so feel free to instruct them accordingly. Which leads me to our next section, communicating with your front of house tech. This is another very important component of your role as a worship leader. You can even think of them as another part of your band because their role and your role are closely connected. When I'm leading a team, here are a few things I make sure to cover with my front of house technician. If there are two people leading a song, be sure they understand who is carrying the melody on which parts. If there's a certain instrumental part that you really want to be heard, feel free to highlight that to them by mentioning it at rehearsal. If you were curious how something translated in the house, feel free to ask them. Maybe you rearranged something or changed the dynamic. Oftentimes they can offer a great outside perspective. And be sure to check in with them at least at the end of your rehearsal to see if they have any input or questions. They are an extremely valuable member of the team. Next, you have your MD, or your music director. This is the person launching tracks and clicks. You will need to communicate to them when you want them to start the click or track for each song. You could simply ask them to start it right away after a song ends, or maybe you want them to overlap the ending of a song with the intro of the next. The start of every track has a count in before the music starts, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have a track for the second, third, or fourth song of your set, and you don't plan to pray or read a scripture during that transition, try overlapping the songs if they flow well. You would communicate to your MD at which point in the ending of the first song to start the track of the next. You can figure this out by listening to rehearsal mix to find out exactly how long that count in is of the song you're moving into, then listening to the end of that first song and counting back that amount. Most worship leaders use different signals when trying to cue the band, and some of it depends on what instrument you play, or if you play an instrument. An acoustic guitarist will often raise the neck of the guitar to signal the end of a song, or rotate the neck in a circle to cue the band to repeat that section. As a keyboardist, I use the signal of looking back to the drummer or rotating slightly towards them to cue the band to end the song. I tend to bounce slightly to cue them I really want to build. If needed, I'll reach down and draw a circle with my finger to cue them to repeat that section. A lot can be signaled verbally, cueing the band of a change, while also allowing the congregation into where you're headed.
Can we sing this together? Let us become. Let us become more aware.
If you're cueing clearly, feel free to make any change you feel necessary on the fly. Maybe God is highlighting something in a certain part of the song. Feel free to speak it out and direct accordingly. The cadence to doing something like that does take practice, so don't feel silly trying that out at home first. You may need to cut off the tail end of a phrase to catch it in time. Some other cues you could use as a vocalist is to shape the word C with your hand, meaning let's go to the chorus. I know some vocalists like to have a cue for bridge, so you could have a little bridge. They do this kind of down back. Obviously, you wouldn't do that right here. You would kind of be doing that subtly behind you. If you're a vocalist and you want to cue the ending of a song, you can just drop a fist right behind your back to cue the band that you are ending. If I'm cueing my MD to launch a track, I will oftentimes do this, to where I'm saying, go ahead and start it. Or if you want them to repeat a section as a vocalist, feel free to give that signal to repeat. And try and do these signals subtly behind your back. It doesn't take much to cue your band. Try and avoid large gestures. I want you as a worship leader to feel empowered to let your instrumentalists know if they're going overboard or if they're playing a little bit too much. Feel free to ask them to simplify. You as a worship leader are assigning your team members with the key that you want them to sing in. But if you come to rehearsal and something is too low or something is too high, please feel free to make that adjustment and maybe assign that part to a different person on your team. It is distracting if there is somebody trying to sing something that is out of their range, whether it's on the low end or the high end. Some other tips I'd have for you as a worship leader to help your band are things like this. Number one, double check Planning Center to make sure the version matches the one you intend to rehearse. Two, if you are doing a version that's different than usual, be sure to point that out in your notes and have an idea of what you want going into rehearsal. If you want your team's input on an arrangement, please specify that in your set details page so they can bring ideas or at least be aware that they don't need to practice the recorded version. Three, if vocal parts need to be worked on, try doing that at the end so that your band is not sitting through them with nothing to do. Four, it's best to have an idea of what you want to say, pray, or read during your welcome and between songs so that you can instruct your band at rehearsal accordingly. Please be sure to mention who you want to play and what you want them to play during those extra parts. 5, take the necessary time at rehearsal to make sure your band fully understands transitions and is fully rehearsed so that they can feel the flow of the set and not need to focus as much on the details during the time of worship. In closing, I want to release you from any pressure you feel after taking in so many details. You don't need to do things perfectly. Just give your best and rely on your team as needed. Becoming a good worship leader is a process, so please enjoy the journey. We have a culture of grace here, and be sure to give grace to yourself as well. Feel free to reach out to me or some of our other worship leaders if some of the things we shared in this video are over your head. We want all of you to feel comfortable with your understanding of music theory and have a good grasp on things like time signature, beats per minute, beats per measure, etc. So feel free to reach out for more information. May the Lord bless you with creativity, inspiration, joy, and peace as you lead your teams. And may you draw closer to Jesus with every set you lead. Thank you for watching, and happy leading.